just to kind of, kick things off, I just wanted to kind of welcome everyone being here, give a few shout outs before we kind of, again, officially, obviously, everyone from SB WASP. I know we have quite a few people from maybe the CSULB, some of those students, and then obviously any Moose in the house, a shout out to them. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of give a shout out, say thanks to everyone for being here. I know it's kind of a holiday weekend. So I just wanted to thank everyone from, who could make it. It will be recorded, so anyone that can't make it, or if you want to watch again later, eventually at some point this thing will be up on YouTube. But yeah, so as we can see here, this is the CTF quote unquote 4. It should be like 4 out of 6. I have a few more boxes that I've done that I'm ready to share. And this is what we can call a boot to root. The box is escalate my privilege. Boot to root typically means there's not really flags involved. It's usually the concept is usually try and gain access to the box and then escalate your privilege in such a way that you are now root. Sometimes there are flags that you can only get once you are root, and that may be part of the hunt. Sometimes just getting root is the actual quote unquote flag. There may not be an actual flag or some sort of proof or welcome message, but in this case there is an actual proof that we'll be getting that kind of congratulates us in a sense of getting root. But again, just to separate that from your typical CTF or capture the flag event where there might be multiple flags or steps, if you will. Usually even those require some form of privilege escalation to get root access, because maybe the final flag is root and there are a few flags along the way to kind of help you out and give you hints and things like that, or maybe it's points. But in this case, this is just a boot to root. So our goal is to essentially gain root access to this vulnerable box. A little bit of information about it. I did copy and paste from the Vuln Hub itself, where this box came from. I copied some information about the author, some of his descriptions on the actual box itself. Just to give you an idea, this is technically an easy beginner level, but that's sort of just really based off of what your experience is. If you've never done any of these or you're fairly new, this could be insanely hard and difficult. And maybe if you've done a few of these, then maybe this is a more beginner, easier box. So even, again, take these kind of for a grain of salt, whatever they say. They intend them to be easy if they say they're easy, but again, it really just depends on your experience. And then I did list some tools that I used to get through this challenge. So, mileage may vary. Obviously, there's a few different ways to probably do this. These are just the tools that I typically will use and usually have success with. But again, these aren't always going to work for every situation. But again, at the same time, some of the boxes that I chose on purpose, where we would be sort of getting a sense of some reoccurring themes of using some of the tools that we have used over and over and over again, because some of them you may use on a lot of boxes, and maybe some of them you may not, but there are a few things to probably do almost on every box. Even if it doesn't yield anything, you'll probably still go through some of these steps. So this is the walkthrough, and with that said, we'll go ahead and jump over to my Kali, and let's go over here. So I have Kali up, and let's see here. So I already have the vulnerable box spun up. I'm not going to go into it. It does show what the IP address is, but again, not all of them have DHCP enabled in the sense that it will show you what the IP address is. So we should always get in the habit of trying to search for the target address. And one of the ways that we can do that to make our life easy is running in NAT. So we can run my Kali in NAT, and we can run the vulnerable box in NAT. So you can see down here, the network adapter is NAT. And if my vulnerable box is also in NAT, then essentially they should both be on the same subnet or the same network. So they should see each other, and that should make things a little bit easier when trying to discover them, because if I don't have anything else running in NAT, then I should have very, very few results. So it should make things a little bit easier of trying to find the target. So the first place we will typically start is trying to figure out what our own address is, right? So this is telling me what my Kali address is. So I know that whatever results I get back from my Nmap scan, I can exclude this one because this is me. This is my Kali instance. So what we'll do is we'll hop over to the Ctf Toolkit. I did push a new version up last night. So there's a couple other features that I've included. You guys can figure out what that means. I don't want to spoil the surprise, but nonetheless, a new version is up with some more content. And Andrea, yeah, plug in the Ctf Toolkit. Of course, this is for you guys. This is something community driven, so that's why I want feedback. But also try and hack it. Let me know if you find anything outside of maybe some things that I've put on there to be found, but. Nonetheless, we'll start with kind of our toolkit. So the first thing we're going to run, obviously, we're going to run Nmap, and we're going to use the SN flag. And again, that's more of like it's not looking for ports; it's host discovery only. And so what that's going to do is tell us, what else is on the network. So we'll do our -in, and then we'll just do the IP range that we're currently in. So 192.168.159 .0 and then /24. Again, your IP address is probably going to be different, but nonetheless, the first thing I would recommend doing is seeing what your own IP address is, and then we're just going to iterate through the subnet that we're on. So again, if we're on the same network, if both our VMs are in NAT, we should both be on this subnet, meaning that the third octet for both boxes should be 15 or whatever yours is. But for my case, they should both be 159. And so I'm just going to go through because I don't know what the target. Well, I'm pretending that I don't know what the target address is. This particular box does tell us, but again, we should be under the assumption that maybe we don't know what the target IP address is. So this is going to essentially go through our class C, this range here. It's going to scan through all of them to see if anything is alive. We're not looking for ports at this point. The -SN is specifically saying what assets are up on the network. So this shouldn't take very long because there's not a lot of devices. So we can see here that this is probably like the VM hypervisor host sort of thing, or whatever the NAT is pushing. I know that this is me, and so most likely this is going to be our target. I know for a fact this is our target, but again, your mileage may vary. More things may show up, but if you're running them in NAT mode, you'll probably only get a very, very small amount of these back. So now that we know our target is the 216, again, we're on the same subnet here. So 216, the first thing I recommend doing is writing that down somewhere. I'm actually going to enter it in here because this will populate any other field where a target would be necessary. What was that? 216. So as you can see here, as I typed out the target address, it populates everywhere else. So it just makes copying and pasting very easy. And then I also, may put it in here, as well, just to have it. Again, notes I can print and download later for whatever reason, but just to maybe stay focused. But nonetheless, now that we have a target, now we can go through things and say, hey, out of a few different types of Nmap scripts or commands, maybe what are some ones that will yield us, some fast yet good results. There's a lot of good out of the box ones here. Typically, I would use something maybe like this one. So I'm going to grab this. Again, our target's already input. So out of the box, I shouldn't have to do anything but copy and paste. But with this, I'm going to make a little bit of an exception. So I noticed that when I ran this Nmap script, it took a very long time to run. So I think what I'll end up doing is I'm going to paste this, but I'm going to remove the -A and the I'll leave the verbose. I'm going to remove the -A because it seemed to get hung up trying to scan this box, and it took a very long time that it should not take. And I'm only scanning one box. Again, we always want to point out that this -P- is all ports. We really want to get in the habit of scanning all ports for a target, because we do not know, unless we've done some other previous recon, we don't know what ports may yield what, or what's open. So it's very common to try this. If this for some reason times out, which it might, then I might remove all ports and just run the generic Nmap scan that I think is like the top 1,000. But we'll see. We'll see how long this takes. But I kicked it off. Nonetheless, we can see that we're already getting back some results here. I can see that there's SSH, this whatever port 111 is. 80, that's a good sign. There's probably a website running. No surprise there. But we'll let this finish because once it does finish, it should also give us some service information. So we'll wait around for a minute just to see. This doesn't look good. That it's going to probably take forever. So I'll wait another minute or two and just to see.
I think you're missing one. Where's the NFS?
So yeah, and so again, depending on the way the box will, the way the Nmap is scanning, again, you may have to try a few different things. So like, for instance, this is telling me that it's going to take an hour to remain. I'm not going to sit through that. So what I'll do is I'll just kick off a generic scan, and I will, for this demonstration, I'm going to exclude all ports because I know that the our foothold is not on an upper port, but just so this can run, so you can at least see that it is doing something. I'll just run just a generic Nmap scan, which I think covers like the first 1,000 or higher. I think it will come back with a 2049 port, even though I think out of the box Nmap just only does like 1,000. But nonetheless, your mileage may vary. You may be able to run the script. Maybe it's because technically this box isn't very like VM workstation friendly. It's mainly meant for, a lot of the boxes on VolnHub are meant for like VirtualBox. So you might be able to run a better Nmap scan than me and have better results. So just keep that in mind, that you may have to try a few different types of Nmap scans, or just wait around. Obviously for this demonstration, I'm not going to wait an hour. If time was not of the essence and I wasn't doing a walkthrough, and sure, I might wait an hour to get the results back, to get the full actual results back. But again, it just really just depends on the network, how it's configured, firewall. There's all kinds of things that could influence the time that an Nmap scan could take. So with that said, I'll just do a generic one. If this still fails, I can copy and paste the results that I already have for this, but this should complete with at least the ports that I'm concerned about. So as we can see here, yeah, again, this is just the generic. I'm missing quite a few ports. I'm missing actually 1, 2, 3, about 4 ports that would normally have been discovered. Although again, for this exercise, we're going to ignore those because I wasn't able to get anywhere with those ports. And I typically will try every port unless I'm successful with one before getting to other ones. So right off the bat, this is what we got back. So, I might just copy this at least. Again, just go over to some kind of crude notes and just say like, oh, you can't run an Nmap, and these were the results. That's good. So right off the bat, we have technically a few choices, doors, options, whatever you want to call them. Normally, I might just, kind of go down the list like, oh, let's try a bunch of things for, 22 SSH, try maybe enumerating the user list if that's possible, and then maybe try and brute force, or maybe it's running some old version. Normally, we would have this information, but again, just for time's sake, I ended up just defaulting to a very quick scan. But I'm going to skip some things again. And we're just kind of take the direct approach. We do know that port 80 is open. So whenever we see port 80 being open, a few things we're going to do. First, let's just open up a browser just to see if we can get to it, if in fact an actual web server is being run. And again, we'll just type in literally the target address. So 192.168.159.216, and let's just see what we get. So sure enough, we do get something. So we know that a web server is in fact running. Some kind of page popped up. You notice that anywhere I try and maneuver, it's going to actually take you to, I believe, an actual like a third party, an actual like InfoSec company. I didn't really do research on them, but it appears to be like a legitimate company, maybe. That it's just like a link. I believe some students or some employees of that company built this box. So they're giving a shout out to the company they work for. But nonetheless, you should be able to like control U to see the source. We always want to check source. And if I skip checking source, it's because I checked it and it didn't yield anything. I'm including that in this demonstration because I checked it and it happened to yield something. So right off the bat, we have a link. It's telling us where to go. Target blank. That's just going to open up a new page. This is the image that's hosting. But the alt is weird because the alt usually is referring to like what's the alternate name for the image. Let's say the image doesn't load or it's broken, or you're trying to find information about the image. The alt is usually reserved for a description for the image. In this case, though, this is a little unusual because it's giving us a path, and it's sort of alluding to IP, maybe the IP of the box /PHP bash. We're not sure, but we're going to keep this in mind. Well, I am sure, but for all intents and purposes, we're not really sure what this means. But we're going to kind of keep that in mind. So it does appear there's a web server running, so that's good. So now we can move on to the things that we do when we think web servers are running. So the next thing we would try is probably Nikto. Again, Nikto is a tool that essentially will try and assess vulnerabilities or do some sort of enumeration or reconnaissance on a web application from the outside, right? We're not logging into it. We're not doing some sort of credentialed scan. We're just running this tool against the application, which is a web application, which is where this thing shines. This is what this is meant to do, scan web applications, to try and give us some information about what that is. So because we typed our target in, again, I can just grab this here, it'll copy it to my clipboard, and maybe the next thing I want to do is say like Nikto, and then we're going to run that and then see what the results are. So I'll run that over here. I can just paste that, and essentially it's going to run Nikto -H means the host, the target, and then we have the IP address for it. And so this is going to run. Shouldn't take too long. Sometimes, again, your mileage may vary. It may take a very long time to run. It really just depends on some of the flags that you use. Like Nmap, there's various flags. Nikto has quite a few flags as well. But we can already see that we're getting some information back. So Nikto does appear to see that there's a robots.txt file, and in that file there appears to be an entry. So we're definitely going to see what that's about. So we got some sort of a hit, or at least a place to check, if you will. Robots.txt, for those of you who don't know, it's typically a file that is used to tell the bots and the crawlers what is acceptable to categorize and what is not. Obviously, on some applications, there may be parts of it that you do not want to show up in search results, or that you do not want the quote-unquote web crawlers and bots to log. In those instances, you will create a robots.txt file, and you will typically put in a disallow list. So we'll see what's in there, but nonetheless, it also looks like there may be some other files that exist on the server. So maybe we'll copy and add that as well. But nonetheless, the robots has me has my attention to list there. So we will venture on over to our website here, and we will look at robots.txt. And sure enough, we have this disallow, which is very common for robots. That's generally the use of it, is, hey, crawlers and bots, please do not look here. Please do not log these paths. A lot of times you'll see like /admin, or you don't want the crawlers to show up your login pages in search results. So it's very common to see essentially whatever the developers do not want you to look at will typically be in this list. Now, for us hackers, this is like a gold mine. This is pretty much saying, go to these places, look here, because they don't want us to go to those places and look there. Now, if we remember from our source, it actually referred to this PHP bash.php file. And sure enough, we can see here in the disallow. So right off the bat, it's kind of like, this is probably not a coincidence that, one, it's here in the source code, that this is not something you would put in an alt tag typically. And robots is also saying, hey, don't look here. So there's a good chance that we're going to go there, and it's probably going to yield something. I like to be thorough, because you never know what can rabbit holes. You never know what the author of the box's intention was. Red herrings are basically like rabbit holes in the sense that they're dead ends on purpose. They're like, you don't really want to call them like a honeypot, but they're places to lead you on that don't go anywhere. So it's always good to be thorough. So we will also do a Dirb just to double check, just to see if there are any other endpoints maybe that we didn't find. So again, since we've already put in our target, it auto populates, wherever there needs to be a population of your target IP, it put it in there. So I'm just going to copy this over, go over to here, and let's see here. Quick question. I don't need to log into Ctf Toolkit. Oh yes, no, there's no login for Ctf Toolkit. Nothing that I can fathom of in the near future.
So,
So whatever you type is whatever you type. It's local storage, so
oh,
that no one will ever be able to see whatever it is that you're typing. Just like obviously I'm sharing my screen, you can see this, but everyone opening up the Ctf Toolkit, you will not see anything that I have typed. But it is local storage, which is cool because I can refresh the page, I can browse around, the notes will persist, but no one can see
okay.
unless
Well,
you're sharing
that's
your
good.
screen.
I didn't know about the notes feature, so I didn't try it, but it looks really great, Dante. I
Yeah,
will
no,
use it next
good,
time.
good question. But yeah, so just those that are wondering, whatever you type here is again, it's local to your machine and your machine only. It is local, it's local storage, so that no one else can and will ever see whatever, unless you're sharing your screen. No
Oh,
one can see
okay.
that.
Okay.
But I will type in Dirb here, and we will run just a quick Dirb. And this is just going to, at least, again, we're being thorough. I ran a Nikto. A Nikto doesn't really, its focus isn't really doing a directory buster. Its focus isn't really, hey, what are all the paths or the endpoints of the application? It's more of what may be the application be vulnerable to, where Dirb really shines at trying to enumerate the different paths that may exist. And so out of its default dictionary, it really wasn't able to find much, but it did find a few endpoints. We did find it. We could probably go look at the PHP info. That's kind of common. We did see there's a CGI bin. If you remember earlier when I showed the cherry tree and a few things in Metasploit and Shell Shock and a few things like that, that's kind of what led me down that rabbit hole. But that at least was a rabbit hole for me. Nonetheless, though, we did get kind of confirmation that robots.txt exists. So I'll put that, but we didn't find really anything else. We didn't find a slew of other endpoints that may be hidden, because if we go back here, it's not like we were given a menu. There's really nowhere to go other than we click this image and it takes us here, but we don't really know if there's other links or pages that exist on this application. And that's why we typically run Dirb, is to say, hey, what's more than meets the eye? What are some things that may exist but we can't see? So just, again, we got some information on Dirb. That's good. Now we'll maybe move towards some manual investigation on the things that we found. So we found the robots, and we got that confirmed basically twice, that there is a robots.txt, and within that robots.txt, we were basically said, hey, don't look here. So we are going to look there. So if we just essentially write this out and go to php vs bash.php, we'll see what's there. And sure enough, we have a very interesting, what appears to be a PHP driven bash shell. Clearly in the real world, this would probably never exist in a million years, that someone would just write a PHP shell that anyone can use from the outside. So we have to suspend a little bit of belief here, or some real world things. But the concepts we're going to do and the techniques we're going to do are 100% real world. But I can't think of a reason necessarily probably to expose a bash shell, PHP bash shell, to the public on your website, because essentially we're going to be able to make calls to the server. So again, this is what appears to be PHP bash, PHP written. So right off the bat, we can see that we're probably this user, and it looks like this is where we are on the server. And so we can literally type in bash commands. Again, this probably would not exist in the real world, but nonetheless, this is probably what the author has intended for us to stumble across, because it did show up in a few different enumerations that we ran. So right off the bat, this is pretty cool, very interesting. There's a ton of things that you can already think of maybe that you would start doing, but it appears that we can at least run some form of some commands. So I did pwd for present working directory, and that shows us that we're in basically the website directory, which that makes sense. Most sites are hosted on a Linux box, especially like Apache, in this var www HTML root, where all the website files kind of sit in here. So Okay, well, let's try a few other things like ls. Maybe we can see the contents of what's in the web server. And sure enough, we can see the index, we can see the actual bash PHP file, we can see info, we can see privilege, which is most likely that the image that we saw, the escalation image. We have a README, we have robots. We already know robots, we already saw that. So a few things, a few questions are popping up. Like, okay, what about let's try like cding to or catting, like oh wow, what do you know? We can cat. There's a ton of things that it appears that we can do. It's almost as if and because again, this is like a bash shell. We essentially have a shell. So right off the bat, like that's pretty impressive. That's normally it takes quite a while to get a shell. So that seems like this work has already been done for us, thankfully, from the author to give us this nice web shell. So while there are a lot of things we can get from this, you'll see that we're going to need to take a few more steps to really get a good foothold and then escalate. So, but sure enough, from here, again, I don't want to get in too far off track, but with this, we can see some hashes here. We could probably take this stuff and take it offline for sure and run it through Ripper or Hashcat to see if we can crack. We know what the usernames are, and we can see if we can crack them. So we do appear to have that information. So that's cool. Maybe let's like home. What are some places we always check? We always check homes. We always check who am I. We always want to know these things. We always want to go to the home directory and see what's there, so we can maybe like let's cd into armor and see what's in there. Okay, well, we're moving pretty quick here. It looks like one, we have a shell that we didn't even need to do anything for. It was just provided to us. Two, it appears that we can get to armor's home directory, and in there, we got a credentials.txt. That's pretty good. So let's just cat that. See what we have. So it appears that my password, I'm assuming that's Armor's password, is root1, but he's maybe suggesting that it's the MD5 hash of root1. So there's a chance that if you were to try and go and crack this, I don't know because I didn't try, because I didn't need to, that this hash in the Linux world, I forget what the default hash is that Linux uses, it's not MD5, would yield root1. I don't know, I didn't try, but nonetheless, he's saying his password is the MD5 hash of root1. So that's cool. That doesn't really do us any good here, because I can't, if you notice, I can't, what's the word? I can't really sudo up to, it's not prompting me for a password. So I don't have any way, at least that I'm able to see. We don't have a way of entering in credentials through this sort of bash shell.
Yeah,
so even having the password, that's awesome. There are obviously other ways in with that, but at least from this avenue, it does not appear that we can authenticate, that we can sudo or switch users to our armor. We have the password for it, but it doesn't appear that we can escalate our privilege through this traditional means here. So okay, but we have a shell, but we need to actually get a better shell on the actual, again, this is like an external shell, and that's being provided through PHP, which is great. We've gotten some information, right? We essentially kind of know what the password is, at least what he's saying, that the password appears to be root1 that's hashed in like in MD5. So we're gonna kind of categorize that away for a minute, and then try a few other things to try and get onto the actual system in a more controlled environment with more functionality in the shell. So from here, like anywhere, whenever we're on a system, we want to try and obviously escalate our privileges or import something that can get us to like the next step. And that usually is like a function of like an external script or something that we can try and run to try and see if we can get a better foothold. So I see that we got some questions. Yes, Linkscar, what's the question?
Yeah, so I know we can't get it here by doing I try a lot of the command you did on this web shell. Why can't you just bring up the that box there and try to go enter your username and password? The box, the other box, your victim box.
Right. We can try that. I'll save that for the end.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But you could see if you're, and I won't say whether it will or won't work. But you can essentially, because we know what we think we know what the password is, so you can technically go over to the box. And however, in a normal world, you would not really have access to that box. So
okay. I got it. Yeah.
You know what I mean? But again, someone else brought up here, like, hey, couldn't you try SSH into it? So I encourage anyone to try and SSH. You have the username and password. I'm going to go a different route for now. We can circle back to some of these things, but these are very good options. You know, good questions like, oh, well, why can't I just do this? Or technically, yes, you could go over to this box, but in the real world, you wouldn't. And normally, once these are spun up, very rarely are they meant to go back to and access it from the VM. I don't know if I've ever had a challenge where I've gotten some credentials and it wanted me to actually like go to the VM, open it, and then use the logon screen there. Most of the time, you spin up the box, it's running, that's the target, and you never kind of mess with it again. Everything is done now externally from like the Kali instance. But again, another point is brought up. Hey, you could just SSH into it. So I'd encourage everyone to try that. Try that password. You can make a hash of it, which we will, because we will actually be using the hash at some point to sudo up, but not actually to like log in. So at this point, we're like, okay, we have some information. We at least have like a username. We have what we believe is a password that appears to be this, but hashed in MD5 format. So what I want to do is I want to try and upload an actual reverse shell that could give me more functionality that I can get kind of back to my Kali instance where I'm a little bit more familiar and feels more like home, and not have to try and manipulate this box through this sort of very basic PHP, web shell. So what we're going to do is we're going to try and figure out how we can get maybe a reverse shell from our system to the target system. There's a few different ways to do that, but I'll go over probably what I think the easiest one is. Now, technically, if you have, let's say, a GitHub and you have some shells yourself on there or no paths to where reverse shells exist, then technically you can sort of skip the step of trying to host your own web server and then pull in that file. But that's what we're going to do. We're just going to assume that I don't have any reverse shells on my GitHub, or that you don't know of any. But we're going to try and do a wget to try and see if we can tell the server, hey, go grab this file, and that file will just happen to will include a reverse shell. In this case, it will be another PHP shell. So I have a list here. I'm going to cd. And here you can see I have some like a couple directories. Reverse shells is going to be one of them. So I'm going to cd into my reverse shells, and I have like just two. One is more complex than the other. For now, I'm going to just use this simple reverse shell. So I'm going to try and figure out a way how I can get this reverse shell onto their system. And again, using wget. If it exists already somewhere on the internet, then you can just go wget and you'll grab that. For this instance, I want to show you guys a technique specifically because I guarantee you'll use it in the future, because you might have to create something custom that will not and does not exist on the web, at least in a form that you can actually go grab it. So I want to show you this because you will use this technique in the future. I can guarantee you for other CTVs and CTF, and boot to roots, where we fire up a simple web server and essentially we can go wget to ourself to go grab a file. So now that I'm in this directory, I can go, I want to start a web server, and it's important that you start the web server in the directory. It just makes things so much easier. In the directory where your scripts or where your reverse shell exists. So again, back here, we're going to go to exploits now. We're going to go to web reverse shells. And I want to just essentially spin up a simple Python web server. And essentially, if you don't know, all this is going to do is just, it's going to leverage Python to create a basic web server, serving files out of the directory that the web server is running in. So if all goes well, I should be able to, and you will need to sudo this, FYI. So either if you sudo up, then if you are a root user, then you want to navigate to wherever your reverse shells are, or just sudo the Python command, and then it should run in the current directory. So as I can see, it's going to prompt me, and now it says it's serving on localhost over port 80. So basically, if I were to go to here, it would show me the contents of the directory. The contents directory are these two files. So now what this allows me to do is perform a wget to launch, to run, to exploit, and then to gain a foothold. So I got a question: how did you get these reverse shells? Well, they're simple reverse shells. They exist. You can write one. They exist anywhere. I'll show you. Let's see. I'll show you one real quick, and we'll go to. Let's open up reverse shells, and you can see in here I got the two. These are the two that we're looking at over here. Basically. This is a more complex one. This is a very simple one. If I just open up the simple one, it's literally one line of PHP code. And actually, this exists on the Ctf Toolkit. So if you go back to the toolkit and we look at reverse shells, we can see the simple shell. We can see a simple reverse shell. This is actually what we're leveraging. So if you don't have one or don't know where to go, literally copy this in a file, call it whatever you want to call it, .php, obviously. And this is essentially, this is literally what we're trying to upload to the web server. That's going to give us a reverse shell. So that's where I got that one, but there's a million of them out there. But the one that's on the Ctf Toolkit is extremely, extremely common, which is why it's on there. It's a very simple one-liner. It's not overly complicated, as some maybe offer different functionality, but this was the simplest one. So for our intents purposes, we're now running a Python, a web server, out of this directory here, out of our reverse shells directory, that essentially is now we have access to these two files. So what I should be able to do now is figure out like where we are, and maybe let's just go back to where we landed originally before we found a bunch of other things. Obviously, also, we want to put it here because this is the only place we have access to from the outside. I don't have access from a URL to home and all these other places. I can only access the contents of the web server from the outside. So it's also very important to where you are, where you're trying to run the wget, to put the file to access it. If I was anywhere else, it wouldn't work. Sure, I could probably upload it to that directory. But that's not going to do me any good if I can't get to it from the web, which means that it has to be hosted in the var www html directory, because these are the things that are being pushed to the public, that are essentially pushed to like the website, if you will. So let's back up here for a second. And so we're going to run our wget. So essentially, we're going to tell the system to go out and get this, because again, we have a bash shell. Basically, we have a shell. We can interact with it. We can tell it to do things. So we're going to tell it to get our reverse shell from our IP address. So if I just do HTTP and then do my Kali box, and then slash the file that I want to get, which I believe I named it, simple PHP reverse shell. So this is the file that I want to grab. This is just more than enough. Simple PHP reverse shell. So if I just go like .php, And sure enough, it got it, which is good. It was able to connect to my system back. And if I look at my Kali instance, I can see here that it's serving, and I also got a get. I can see I got a get request to this, and it was 200. So I can confirm that in fact this simple web server did serve a page, and I was able to get it over here. I can also confirm by just an ls, and sure enough, now I see my PHP file here. So this is awesome. We, one, we were blessed with this shell to begin with, which has given us a good foothold. Two, just by leveraging wget, we were able to pull a file from our system, leveraging Python, a simple web server. But again, this didn't have to be our box. Wherever this file exists on the internet, I could do a wget to. So again, if you have your own web server and you store files, or a GitHub, whatever, that's where this would exist. It's just, again, for this demonstration. And I think for things in the future that you won't be lucky enough to be able to find them on the web, or don't exist on your Git or someone else's Git, you will have to serve them. There will be some times where you're going to have to do some custom things that only exist on probably your Kali instance. So it's a good habit of at least knowing that you can create a one-liner web server, if you will, just out of running this command here. Where'd it go? This right here, to spawn a simple web server. And again, I spawned it in my reverse shells directory, which means anything in that directory is up for grabs. I have access to go get. In this instance, I wanted to get this simple one. So now we have essentially a simple PHP reverse connection coming back to us. Now there's two things we have to do now. One, I need to activate this. I need to trigger this, and two, I need to capture it. So I can essentially stop my Python server. It's already done what it needed to do. It served the file. I don't really need to do any other purpose now. I don't need to keep the this connection running. So I got a question here. wget wouldn't work. You did it outside the directory. So wget would probably work in the sense that I would be able to tell this target, this operating system, to go grab the file. The problem is if I'm in any other directory that is not this HTML directory, I will not be able to access it in the URL. So we uploaded the PHP code, but now we have to trigger it. Like this, sitting here, it does not do anything. I have to activate this file by going to it, and the only way I can do that is from the outside. If I upload it to this only exists like in the web. So if I was to put this in like Armor's home directory, I have no way of triggering it from the outside. And I'm not sure even triggering it from I don't even know that I have a way of triggering it from the inside, because I have to typically do this from like a URL that then runs the PHP code. And usually the PHP code is going to run typically is going to require the web server, which is running PHP. Let's see, there's more. You may be able to use the move to put it in that directory though, right? If you messed up. Yes, absolutely. Technically, let's just say you were not in var www.html. Let's just say you were in some other directory and you uploaded it and it did upload, you could technically use mv or move, yes, to in fact put it here. As long as it ends up here, then we can essentially trigger that reverse connection, which is the next thing that we're going to do now. Just know that it needs to be here before it's all said and done for us to actually do this kind of next phase of the exploit. So not all is lost if you uploaded this somewhere else, or sure, you can just go to this file and do a wget again. But the fact you already downloaded it, it doesn't hurt to exercise your Linux commands and do a move to this directory. So we have our reverse shell. Now we got to trigger it, and then we got to figure out how we interact with it. So for that, we're going to trigger it, we're actually just going to go visit this page. This is a file on the web server in this directory with everything else that's being served. So we know how to trigger it, which we'll get to, but we have to sort of catch it, if you will. So if we go back here, typically how you catch your reverse shells is going to be through netcat, and you're going to listen in on a specific port. Now, the port is important because, one, I hard-coded it into this, but this port can be anything you want. Just note that whatever you've coded into your reverse shell has to be the port that you listen in on your netcat. So if this was just 1, 2, 3, 4, then I need to make this 1, 2, 3, 4. But again, I hard coded this, which is why you see this here. So this is technically an arbitrary number, and it can be. Just know that it has to match whatever other arbitrary number that you enter in your reverse shell. Again, most reverse shells, there may be a default port, there may be no port. It might just say the word port. So you get to pick whatever, whatever port you want to access it on, or whatever you want, whatever the port is that the shell connects to you back on. Just note that whatever you're listening for, you have to be listening on that same port. So just as long as these match, then you're good to go. So for me, this is what I essentially need to run to quote unquote listen for any traffic coming in on that port. So I'm going to give myself some room here, and I'm going to fire up my listener. I'm just going to paste this. So right now I'm telling my Kali instance, hey, listen to any traffic coming in on this port 1337, or LEET, if you will. Now what I need to do, I need to actually trigger the reverse shell. So for that, I'm just going to literally put this in the path here, because we know that this is what's executing this kind of generic shell that we're looking at now. So if I just paste this, I shouldn't really see anything, but I get this guy here that is pretty much telling me like it's doing something. This is good. This is what we want to see. Typically, nothing will really change here, but I'll see this here. If it's waiting for something, and it's even telling us down here, it's waiting for this server. Now, if I go back to my Kali, sure enough, it says connected to. So now we have a reverse shell to our Kali instance. We're a little bit more free to move around. We have more resources, and we're not dealing with this sort of web shell that we were dealing with over here that makes things a little awkward for us. So right off the bat, we always want to do like, where did I land? Well, we know where we landed because this is pretty much where we were before. We tried a few things like CD to home. Where were we there? We can, CD into AR armor. So some of this is, none of this is new. We saw this before, but we didn't have a way of sudoing up, and not to mention like our shell is kind of janky right now, So for those of you who have maybe done this before or seen a couple other walkthroughs, we want to try and maybe get a better shell that gives us probably a little more wiggle room. Maybe we're able to execute a few more commands. Maybe we're able to do things that we wouldn't normally be able to do in this sort of limited shell. Definitely on this web shell is very limited. And even here, we're sort of limited in maybe some of the things that we're gonna do. So the first thing we wanna do is try and at least get like a normal PTY or TTY shell. And again, for that, we're gonna leverage our privilege escalation. Sorry, escaped me. And so for that, we're going to run our very common Python to give us this sort of shell. And you'll notice here, I'm going to try and run this, and it didn't seem to do anything. And this is common sometimes because this is leveraging Python, but you might not know what versions of Python, and there might be multiple versions of Python on this system. So I encourage you that if you try and run this and it doesn't work, try a few different things. So let's try Python 2. And then you have to type this because on these shells, you typically won't have the option to up arrow to history or backspace, or I should say scroll. I would say just get in the habit of probably just typing this out. Oops. This will probably be one of the ones that you end up memorizing anyway. So anyway, so let's just try Python 2. Didn't seem to do anything. All right, let's try one last one. Try Python 3. And we're going to have some luck on this one. Hey, what do you know? So at least we got a little bit of what maybe is a better shell. Sometimes you can stack them. Again, you can see here I'm trying to press up for history, and it's it doesn't really work. So sometimes I'll try and even do it again. And okay, nothing. So anyway, so we have a good shell here, at least something better than we had before. So now maybe we have a little more flexibility in some of the things we can do. Just to recap again, we ran Nmap just to find out what our target is. We did another Nmap scan once we found our target to figure out what ports were open. We saw a handful. There's quite a few. One of the ones that we kind of focused on was port 80. Again, it's kind of a common entry or entry point into these boxes. So from there, we do what we do when we see a web server running. We ran Nikto that confirmed that it appeared to be a web server running. Found a robot.txt file. To also confirm, we ran Dirb directory buster. Also confirmed that there appeared to be a robots.txt file. Once we inspected the robots.txt file, we saw that there was an entry that basically says "Don't look here," and that's where we were led to this sort of PHP shell that's here running on the server. I don't know why, but nonetheless, it was. We were able to navigate and browse around. We think we found some credentials. We can see here that we changed directory over to Armor and to his, and we saw that this credential file. And from here, we can see that it appears that his password is root1 MD5. So it appears that he's using an MD5 hash to just encrypt or whatever his password. So now that we are actually more like on the box where we can pass in credentials and attempt to like sudo up, we can try and see if we can log into Armorer now, since we couldn't do it from here, right? Because we tried to sudo up and it never asked us for credentials. There was no way for us to pass them, even if we had hashed this out in MD5. We had no way of passing those credentials over. When we just su over to that user, it just gave us a new line. So we had to find another way to get a foothold to try and land in the box and then sudo up or change users to Armorer, and then from there try a few things out. So from here we can actually just now that we know we can sudo up, because it's going to ask us if I su to Armorer, it's asking for a password. That's good. Before it never did that. So now what we can do is we can run we can essentially create our own hash of the password. We know the password is root1, and we can, within just a generic script here, we can hash this into MD5 and then just paste that. So the command for that is we're going to echo out, which just basically is just saying, hey, display on the page, and root1. And so we're saying, okay, we're going to pipe that into an MD5 sum. And all this is doing is just creating an MD5 out of this text root1. And so it didn't create a file, it didn't go anywhere, it's just displaying us this. But now that this has been displayed, this is good, because now I can just copy this. And maybe I'll also, just before I go too crazy, maybe I'll just say something like, creds hash or something, and just paste it. In case I forget or I don't want to regenerate it. But now I can just paste it here. And sure enough, now I am user Armorer. So this is good. I'm at least now a user that I know exists on the box, probably with some privileges that I'm going to be able to exploit or elevate to get me over to root. So this is good. I'm no longer Apache or var, whatever it is that I landed in as. I am now this user. Now, thankfully, there was a hidden file for us that's essentially telling us what his password was. But nonetheless, that's just I feel pretty confident, that we're on path of what the author is intending us to do on how to solve this box. So now we are this user. So again, what are the things that we do when we are those, when we elevate our privileges and we land as someone else or wherever we are? We always want to do like a who am I, a where are we type thing. Well, we kind of know where we are. A key is we want to try and figure out, now again, from here, there are a lot of things we could try. We can try grabbing out, again, outside scripts. We can try running, less, a very, very common Linux exploiter that tells us some flaws that may exist on this distribution. Linenum as well is an extremely common one that will essentially enumerate from the inside out that tells us, hey, what are some things that we may be able to try and exploit on this. But yeah, a comment here, even something simpler that we may be able to do is just a basic privilege escalation things. Just run some basic things to try and figure out, like, what can we run as root? You know, what do we have access to? So this is where things get very interesting. At this point, it's kind of like pick your I don't even know what to even say. It's like pick your escalation exploit. Normally you don't get this type of yeah, pick your poison kind of, but this is like, I guess, poison in a good way. Essentially, these are different services that we can run as root. So essentially we have like 100 different options we can paths we can go down to try and do some sort of privilege escalation. So oops, before I do that, so I picked maybe like 10. There's 10 in here that I typically see that are very common ways to gain access. And let's see here, I'll open this up. If you haven't already bookmarked, I actually put this on the toolkit down here, basically an extensive list of GTFO bin, the website that essentially will give you possible shells or SUIDs to escalate privileges. So this website is literally built around, on Linux machines, trying to find ways to escalate your privilege. So I've included a few of these on the toolkit. This obviously isn't by no means like a full resource, a full list, but these are some things that I think you may run into quite a few times. So really at this point, you could just literally go down the list and then check things off of if they exist over here. So we'll just go alphabetical. Awk. I know that awk is on this list right here. So I know that there's one way I can try. FTP is another way I can try. There's some common ones, but essentially if an exploit exists, if we could find some way to leverage one of these services to a shell, these are literally all of our options. So maybe the author intended that, maybe they didn't. They probably did, because this whole thing is really about escalating privileges. But at this point, we're home stretch. There are numerous exploits or services we can exploit to get us to root user. I think, again, for ease, we'll go with the awk. I believe I put awk on this one. Yeah. So at this point, I can just say, okay, let's run this command, and I'll probably even try a simpler one later. I'll back out, but let's just say for right now we didn't see FTP in the list. So I can just copy this, and I can come here and I can just run. Again, I'm essentially trying to run awk as sudo, and it's going to give me a bin bash shell. But because I can run these as root, it's going to make me root. So okay, so this is different. I'm not this thing anymore, so that's interesting. But if I who am I? Oh, so that didn't work. So that also didn't work because I didn't put sudo in front of it. Let me grab the right one. But nonetheless, some of these may not work. Some of these will work. Some of these won't work. It also depends on what the use is of the service and what permissions and privileges you are giving to run that service, and then how you actually run the service. So right now I'm trying to sudo up to this, but again, it may not work every time. But we'll paste this instead, and let's see, what did that give us? Or maybe I need to re-up to. Oops, if I can spell. Okay, so this did actually give us escalated permission. So I am root now. So this actually worked. So I essentially rooted this user or this box with the awk. I don't really want to call it an exploit, but because Armor was given access to awk as root, we can essentially leverage that to start a shell giving us root privileges. So I'll exit real quick, and I can show you that I'm now back to Armor. Another easy one is FTP. And this is a really weird one because you kind of break FTP to give you a shell. So this is a very common one. I can literally just, I'll show you over here, just sudo FTP, and so it's like, FTP, again, this would be like where I would connect to a remote host. I would do a put or a get. I would try and do something like that. But the nature of the way this privilege escalation works is I can just pound or bang, sorry, and now I'm root. So that's another interesting way to escalate privileges, again, because we were given access to services as root that are probably never intended to be leveraged this way. But these could be very common misconfigurations of a user's privileges that a lot of times are easily exploited. I mean, I think a lot of exploits in the wild are done because of misconfigured privileges, which is, it's in the news all the time. I think the latest AWS, or I forget what bank it was or whatever breach, was just misconfigured privileges. It happens quite often, whether it be in the cloud or on these physical boxes. It's extremely common for a user to maybe be given more privileges than it needs, or maybe it does need these privileges. It escaped the admin that it would ever be used in this way or could be used in this way. So again, as mentioned, pick your poison, pick your path, but essentially we have like 100 different ways we could probably try and leverage. I, again, found numerous ones that I was familiar with, awk, bash, nmap, systemctl, sudo. What's I think is hilarious is the obvious one. I'll back out of root and I'll quit the FTP. And so at this point, I'm back to being Armorer. And what I think is, funny is I can just sudo up to root. So at that point, it's just not even an exploit. It's just, again, the nature of how this user was created. So sometimes you may be finding it, making it difficult on yourself. Maybe you just try sudoing up. For those of you that don't know, the sudo space -i is very, very common in Linux to just, sudo up to root. Sometimes it'll ask you for a password. Sometimes it won't. It really just depends. How was your user created? How was Armor created with the privileges? What services do they have access to? And things like that. So, and again, the sudo space -l is a very common command to run that tells you, hey, what can I kind of list me things that I have the ability to sudo up to? And again, depending on how it's configured is whether it will or won't prompt you for a password. It might prompt you for your own password. In that case, we just re-enter our hash. Maybe it asks you for the root password. In that case, we're kind of screwed because we don't have that root password. Although we can access the shadow file. We did see there was a hash there. We could take that offline to crack it. But in this walkthrough, it appears that we did not need to do that. I don't know. I haven't actually seen a walkthrough done on this. I don't know if there are other ways that people were able to do, if they did leverage trying to brute force the passwords. I didn't see a need for that. But again, nonetheless, that we can see that the way this user was configured, we have a lot of options. One of the questions was Telnet. So I'm not sure if Telnet, so I believe Telnet is in, this is alphabetical, so that's good. I think Telnet is here. Yeah, so Telnet is here, and we can see here that it does appear to have a shell associated with it and things like that. But granted, we need to make sure that it's in this list as well. So we could, take this list offline or just, scroll through it, or we could just attempt to see if Telnet would work. So if we go over here, if I click Telnet, I didn't try this one. It wasn't in my list, but essentially we can see shell, reverse shell, limited SUID, things like that. So we could attempt to, it appears to be like how you would try to exploit it. We would type this stuff out and then try and telnet to it to see if it would give us some sort of shell back. So, but again, if it's in this list, then we could probably leverage that. Yeah, as long as it's in this list and there's some form of escalation, then we could probably do that. I know that, you know, Amok is one I'm familiar with, the FTP, awk, just basic sudo, yeah, are good. So we got a request for that site. So here is site. I'll put that. Oops, go back here. And so this is the actual site here. It's also on the Ctf Toolkit, but here in the chat, I'll post it. And then also, again, if you just happen to be using the toolkit, if you go down at the bottom of the Privesc, because I have a few of these examples, one that I kind of use a bunch already here on the toolkit. But again, if you don't, you know, see yours in the list, you can go here and extend and pretty much get the full list. And I think that you'll find that this will probably solve a lot of boxes for you guys, especially privilege escalation ones, because the list is just so, it covers so many things. But granted, not all of these are going to give you some sort of shell escalation, but you may be able to leverage it in a way that might yield, you know, something else. But it kind of tells you like what it is that this offers, like what it is that you can do leveraging this binary. Or application, whatever you want to call it, and then whatever the function is for that. So again, we leverage the awk. We can see all the different things that you may be able to do, you know, with awk. If we scroll down to the FTP, we can see here that these are what can be done with the FTP command. For us, we were looking for the shell, and so for us, all we really had to do was just literally run FTP, and then this says enter this. I was able to just literally just pop in just the bang. So again, mileage may vary. You might need to try a few different things, but nonetheless, we were able to get quite a few things. So now we're root. That's great. Our work kind of isn't over, but we're pretty much approaching home base here. So we can figure out where we are. We're already home essentially. As soon as I suit it up, I'm essentially in root. So I just ls, and I can see here in our directory, it looks like there's a proof.txt. That's a pretty good indication that it's going to be like the flag of some sort. So we'll just cat that, and then sure enough, best of luck. And then we have, you know, some random number. I believe this was like a CTF, so this was probably the hash or pass phrase that you would enter in to kind of get the points. But at this point, yeah, that's it. This box is done. So again, just to recap, we use Nmap to find the target. We use Nmap to scan the ports to figure out 80 was open. We did some recon on report 80 with Nikto and Dirb. We found that there was a robots.txt. We found in that file there was a mention of a path that they didn't want us to see. We went there. We found this gem, which essentially is like a shell, a PHP shell. And we were able to do some things. We could navigate. We did find that there was, you know, a cred text and a few other things, but we didn't have a way of accessing the user in a way that was going to get us to root. So we just uploaded our own PHP shell by essentially running our own Python web server in our directory where our shells existed. That enabled us to run a wget to ourself and grab that file. Now that file is on the target machine, we can just execute that by visiting that said file, which is very common in the application world. If you upload your reverse shell, you have to be able to get to it from the outside. And we would not be able to do that if it was in any other directory other than what's being served to the web. So since we're in the web directory, we uploaded our shell there. That's how we're going to access that. And so all we did was just navigate to our file, which included our PHP reverse shell. And when we run this, it runs the reverse shell. And then from that, we fired up a listener. And basically, once we executed that script, it triggered the listener to say, "Hey, we're connected to each other now," because we were listening over the same port. And then from there, it was just a matter of browsing around. We found the credentials. It appeared to be, you know, he was saying this password is this, but as in an MD5 format. And now that we have this type of shell, we're able to actually pass in credentials and sudo up to that user. So in our other window here, we just echoed out the hash, MD5 hash of this, and that spit this out. So we just used that to change users. And once we changed users, we then just had to figure out another step of privilege escalation. And so in that, it was very easy for us just to run the sudo-l command, which gives us a list of everything that we can kind of sudo. And in these lists, it just so happens that there are quite a few binaries or services in here that we could exploit, if you will, to give us access to a root user. And we just did a few. I did awk, FTP. Again, there's a ton that I found out via ones that I already knew, and then also with the GTFO bins website is very, very common, and I think will go a long way. So basically, as long as any of these show up in your sudo-l list and have shell next to them, there's a good chance that you can probably leverage it to gain some sort of access. Another comment is, couldn't you just echo of the reverse shell? I'm not sure that echoing would work, because I believe that would just show and not run. I haven't tried that, but if you do try it, let me know if that works. I mean, I in doing these, you kind of form some bad habits in the sense that I know what will typically work, and then I generally will kind of stick to those and not try a bunch of other random things. I mean, sometimes I might try other ways in, and once I've solved a box or figured it out. But in this case, I didn't try a few other ways. Maybe again, I'm curious as to if you were to echo that, or let's see if I understand this correctly. If you just echo the script or echo the one-liner, I don't believe would work. But okay, it looks like maybe you tried it, didn't work. But I love it. I recommend everyone try different things, because just because I did this a certain way doesn't mean that everyone needs to or will. And yes, I quote unquote was sticking to the script and the script in the sense that this is probably the way the author intended. But it doesn't mean that there may be other ways. Just like I'm not sure that the author, intentionally flooded this. Maybe they did, but maybe that's just how they set up the user, and maybe they intentionally planted a few like FTP or awk or whatever, but maybe they didn't realize that accidentally also there were just a ton of other ways to gain entry. Or again, maybe he did intend for us to brute force, because going back to this generic PHP web shell, we were able to access Etsy Shadow, and we were able to see that there were some hashes in there that maybe we could run through offline into John the Ripper or Hashcat. So there's, again, I don't know, I haven't actually watched a walkthrough of this if there is one. But yeah, sloppy sysadmin for sure. Fire that guy, or put him in a different role. Slap his wrist. But nonetheless, again, you may have find different ways in, but this is just the eventually where I ended up getting in, and how, again, I tried a few other things, shell shock, a few other injections, a few other options bleed, some Apache things. I spent quite a bit of time on Apache because it is an older version, but unfortunately those didn't go anywhere. A few other things with Metasploit, and those didn't go anywhere. A few things with Nikto as well, trying to enumerate the CGI bin. But what ended up working for me was just sticking to this bash PHP, which, again, it's probably here for a reason, and then getting that, shell uploaded, and then from there it allowed me to kind of work more out of an environment that I'm more custom with, which is more of like my Kali instance, as opposed to trying to do things through this web shell here. But nonetheless, we were able to gain a foothold. We got the credentials, we passed those through, we suited up to Armor, and then from there, it just so happens that the way that this user was configured, it left a lot of doors open for us to, I guess you could call it an exploit, but I look at it more of just, it's maybe an exploit in the case that we used it in a way that it maybe wasn't meant to be used, or maybe it wasn't if we're in pretend land, that the admin didn't mean to be able to circumvent other escalation avenues for us to just walk in, leveraging some of these binaries, but nonetheless, with so many of these here, there's a good chance that you're going to be able to at least find one. Again, I found like roughly 10. I'm probably a ton more. I didn't even go through all of them at that point. It'd be pointless. But again, as long as you find something here, there's a good chance, and if it has shell next to it, there's a good chance that if this exists in this list, you'll be able to, I believe this is one as well, you'll be able to leverage that to gain root. And then once we got root, it kind of already plopped us into the roots directory. And then from there, we were able to see that there was a proof.txt. And then once we got that, it's pretty much game over in the sense that not only are we root, we found the quote unquote flag that confirmed. But again, this is a boot to root. So at this point, we're just pretty much end of the line. So with that said, this box is done. Again, want to thank everybody for joining. Hopefully some of you were able to hack along. But again, thanks to everyone.